When you hear the words kidney transplant, you probably think of one thing, a second chance, a miracle. But what if that's not the whole story? A massive new study is kind of flipping the script on our long-held beliefs. And honestly, the answers are pretty surprising.
I mean, just imagine it. You're stuck on a dialysis machine for hours, multiple times a week, just to stay alive. And then, one day, the phone rings. It's that call you've been dreaming of, a new kidney. It's so much more than just an operation, right? It feels like you finally reached the finish line.
And look, for most people, that's absolutely true. A transplant isn't just about feeling better, it's about living longer. For decades, it's been the undisputed gold standard in the fight against kidney failure. No question about it. So when you think about it, there are really two paths. You can stay on dialysis, which is, grueling, but it keeps you going, or you can get a transplant. And the transplant promises freedom from that machine and more years of life. Seems like a total no-brainer, doesn't it? But what if that choice isn't so clear-cut for everyone? Well, here's where things get interesting. Modern medicine has gotten so incredibly good that we're now able to offer transplants to patients who are older and have more health issues. And to keep up with that demand, we're using kidneys from a much wider range of donors, some of which aren't exactly in perfect condition. So our own success has kind of created this fascinating new puzzle. And this all leads to one really critical question. For the oldest, most fragile patients who might be getting a less than perfect kidney, is a transplant still the life-extending miracle we've always believed it to be? A team of researchers decided it was high time we found out for sure. And the key to this whole puzzle is a term you might not be familiar with, an expanded criteria donor kidney. Basically, these are kidneys that come from older donors or from donors who had certain health problems. They're absolutely essential for making more transplants possible, but they're not quite the same as a kidney from a perfectly healthy 25-year-old. Yeah, the criteria are actually very specific. We're talking about donors who are over 60, or maybe they're in their 50s but had a history of high blood pressure, some kidney issues of their own, or they died from something like a stroke. Each of these things adds a small but, pretty significant layer of risk to the whole thing.
So that's where this landmark study comes in. It was presented at the big 62nd EARA Congress. And the goal was pretty simple. Let's cut through all the noise and get a clear, up-to-date answer on who really, truly benefits from these higher-risk transplants. And just look at the sheer scale of this thing. The team analyzed data from over 64,000 people on the transplant waitlist across 5 different regions in Europe. I mean, with a sample size that massive, the results are going to be incredibly solid.
And this wasn't just some quick snapshot either. They looked at data spanning nearly 2 decades, all the way from the year 2000 to 2019. That kind of long-term view is absolutely crucial for understanding what really happens to patients years down the road. So how'd they get such a clear picture? Well, they use this brilliant statistical method called target trial emulation. The best way to think about it is like a flight simulator, but for medical research. It's ethically impossible to do a real randomized trial for this kind of question, right? So instead, they use all this real-world data to simulate that trial, which gives them these incredibly powerful insights without the usual biases. The study's lead author, Dr. Rachel Hellemans, she put it perfectly. She said this method allowed them to get as close as ethically possible to a randomized clinical trial. In other words, this is about as close as we can possibly get to a perfect, unbiased answer. All right, so what did this groundbreaking study actually uncover? The results are, they're complex. They really challenge some of our most basic assumptions about kidney transplants, and they reveal a surprising new reality for certain patients. So, after all that data, all that sophisticated analysis, what was the big takeaway? Did that promise of a longer life with a transplant actually hold up for everyone? Okay, first things first, let's get some reassuring news out of the way. For the vast majority of patients who get a kidney from a standard donor, the survival benefit is still huge. It's undeniable. That core principle of transplant medicine, it's as true today as it ever was. But here it is. Here's the bombshell. Look at this chart. For patients 75 and older who got one of those expanded criteria kidneys, their 5-year survival rate was around 57 to 58%. Okay, now look at similar patients who just stayed on dialysis. Their survival rate, 54%. That is a tiny, tiny difference. That huge survival advantage we all just assumed was there, well, for this group, it practically vanishes.
And the researchers were able to really zero in on the exact group where this benefit was smallest. We're talking about patients over 75, people who already had heart problems, and those who received a kidney from a specific type of donor, one whose heart had already stopped. When you have that specific combination of factors, the choice between transplant and dialysis suddenly becomes a whole lot murkier. So, what in the world is going on here? Dr. Hellemans explains that for these older, more fragile patients, those first few months after the transplant are just a massive battle. Their bodies are already frail, and you pile on the stress of major surgery and powerful anti-rejection drugs. Well, sometimes that initial hit is just too much, and it can completely wipe out the long-term benefit you'd hope to get from the new kidney. So, what does all this mean for patients? Well, it's not about taking away the option of a transplant. Not at all. It's about having a more realistic, more honest conversation about what the real risks and rewards are, and using this incredible new data to make decisions that are truly informed. Now, let me be absolutely clear about something. The point of this research is not to tell older patients they shouldn't get a transplant. That's not the takeaway here at all. In fact, the ERA Registry Director, Dr. Vian Destel, said it best. The message isn't don't transplant older people. It's be open about uncertainty when the numbers say benefit may be marginal. It all comes down to honesty and transparency. And honestly, this is a total game changer. It allows doctors and patients to have a completely different kind of conversation. Armed with this data, they can talk openly and personally about what matters most to that specific patient, weighing the potential risks against their own life goals. So this research really gives us a whole new framework for these incredibly tough decisions. You can think of it as a three-step process. First, you acknowledge the data. You look at what the numbers say. Second, you talk about the individual, their personal risks, their goals. And finally, you make a decision together, as a team. And all of this leaves us with a question that goes way beyond just kidney transplants. As medicine gets better and better at keeping us alive longer, how do we actually measure success? Is it just about tacking on more months or years? Or is it about the quality of that time? This remarkable study doesn't give us an easy answer, but it forces us all to ask the question. And that, right there, might be its most important contribution of all.